Hello, good morning. London calling. I'm going to wait a few minutes so that we can make sure that everybody has dialed in, and then we will start our Facebook Live on the question of the citizens' rights in the case of Brexit. And while I wait, I have to share an information with Joachim, my colleague here. Yesterday night I was at Mansion House attending the Burns Night organised in honour of the First Minister of Scotland. So Nicola Sturgeon was there, hosted by the Lord Mayor. And there was this interesting piece of information in his dinner speech the Lord Mayor provided, which is the following. There was a poll, and the question made in the different cities of the UK, and the question was, what is the second city in the United Kingdom? And the result in Birmingham was that approximately 58% said the second city of the UK is Birmingham, right, followed by Liverpool. In Manchester, the figures were 63% said the second city is Manchester, of course, followed by Birmingham, interestingly. But where it becomes interesting, when they went up to Edinburgh, approximately, or more precisely, 98.7% said that indeed the second city of the UK was London, which I found very funny. And there was a good atmosphere there. So I hope that you are joining us in great numbers. I think you're all there, so let us start. I am Alexandre Fasel. I am the Ambassador of Switzerland to the United Kingdom. Started my posting here in September 17, in time for the high noon of Brexit. And this is my colleague Joachim Tomachet. He is the head of the political section. He will step in and help me to provide answer and precise answers because he knows it all. He participated in all the conversations and dialogue we had with the British officials on this agreement on citizens' rights. So I would like to start by outlining what that agreement is, the Citizens' Rights Agreement between Switzerland and the UK. We will tell you everything we know about the settled status process, and then we will come to your questions. You have already submitted a lot of questions in advance, which is excellent, so we will answer those, and then we will also have, I hope, some time left to answer questions you will be sending in as we speak. So let's start with some background information. I should explain first why Brexit has an impact on our relationship between Switzerland and the UK. It is because Switzerland, of course, is not an EU member. So why is Brexit important for us as well? We have very close relations between Switzerland and the UK, but they are based on Switzerland's bilateral agreement with the EU and Britain's membership in the EU. So once Britain leaves, there is a gap in our legal arrangement, in our bilateral legal arrangement. So what we needed to do was to replicate the agreements we have with the EU into our bilateral relationship with the UK. And our teams in Bern and London have been working hard to ensure that there was no disruption as a result of the UK's departure, regardless the type of Brexit. That is, Brexit on the basis of a deal, or Brexit in the scenario of a no deal. That actually doesn't change anything for your situation as Swiss citizens. All crucial elements are in place, and Switzerland in this process has been a frontrunner all along as far as third country agreements in the wake of Brexit are concerned. So before Christmas, we announced that an agreement had been signed off by the Federal Council on Citizens' Rights. It is one of 5 agreements that make sure that the continuity between Switzerland and the UK after Brexit is there. We have also, so we have the agreement on citizens' rights, but also on trade aviation, insurance and road transport. 5 agreements in all, and that completes what the Federal Council called the Mind the Gap strategy, precisely avoiding this gap I was referring to. Now, I would like to add that we had a very constructive, close, fruitful cooperation with the UK authorities throughout that conversation and the preparation of all these agreements. We were in and still are in a daily contact on different level, and we have spoken many times indeed also in the last days as we were checking on some of the answers we are providing to you on your questions. So a very good cooperation with our British colleagues. Now, to the settled status. The settled status will be the permanent residency system post-Brexit. And how is it going to work? And we make the distinction between a no-deal scenario and the deal scenario, but in substance it will be the same. So, every Swiss citizen and their family members looking to remain in the UK beyond December 2020. And you recognize the date, that's the end of the transition period. So I am in the deal scenario now. So every Swiss and their family looking to remain here should apply for the new permanent residency permit, which will be called settled status. And it is the same scheme for the EU and for the EEA citizens. Everybody will have the same scheme, which is the settled status. In order to be eligible for settled status, you'll need to have started living in the UK before the 31st of December 2020 and have lived here for a continuous 5-year period. Family members who are living with Swiss citizens in the UK will also be able to apply for settled or pre-settled status. What is the pre-settled status? So if you have been living here for 5 years, you apply for the settled status. If you have been living here for less than 5 years, you will be eligible for the pre-settled status instead. And then when you have accrued the 5 years, you will be able to apply for the settled status. So, family members who are living with Swiss citizens in the UK will also be able to apply for settled or pre-settled status. Your family members, including present and future children, are all protected. Even spouses you might not even have met yet have rights and have their rights protected. So in that last case, you've got 5 years from now to have the time to find a spouse and bring them over here. You may have seen that last week the Prime Minister announced that no EU citizens will have to pay for their settled status application. There had been initially a 55 fee foreseen. This has been waived. We approached the Home Office to confirm that this also applies to Swiss citizens. They have stated that this will also apply to you, and generally speaking and also to EEA citizens. So none of you will have to pay anything for settled or pre-settled status. You may also have seen that a pilot scheme is open for settled status that opened last week, but this is only for EU citizens, not for Swiss citizens. So the Swiss citizens cannot join that pilot yet. We will have to wait for March when the process opens for Swiss citizens as well. So those are the basic elements. I would now like to talk you through the practicalities of actually applying for the settled or the pre-settled status. And this will happen like that. Applicants will need to fill an application form online using a computer, a tablet, a smartphone. And the UK Home Office will provide support over phone or in person if you need help during the online application process. So there will be help, but the process as such will be an online application process. This digital application process will take applicants through 3 stages: proving their identity, evidencing their residence in the UK, and checking that they have no serious criminal offence. The application system will use existing data from HMRC and from the Department for Work and Pensions to try to minimize the burden on applicants to provide evidence of their residence. And once approved, there will be no physical document telling you that you have received the status or pre-settled status. Instead, so there will be no stamp in your passport or such like. There will be a proof which will you will be given an online code that you can then send on to employers so that they can see evidence of your status. So no physical evidence, all the process is online, and then the approval is also online by a code. The Home Office has been testing this settled status procedure before it opens fully. A private testing phase took place back in December with a sample of 30,000 real applications. So that gives us a clear sense of how it is actually working. And of those 3,000 real applicants, all were granted either settled or pre-settled status. None were refused. 69% of cases were processed in 3 working days. 81% were processed within a week. 77% of the applicants reported that it was a fairly easy to complete the process, and 70% of applicants agreed that the application form was quicker than expected to complete. So that is good news. So all those signs so far suggest that this should be a fairly straightforward and quick process. And we do believe that, generally speaking, most of our Swiss citizens here are the more straightforward cases. We will, of course, keep an eye on how these processes and progresses, and if needed, we will make representations to the Home Office with feedback we receive from you as to the functioning of the online application process. So that was in case of a deal, a Brexit with a transitional period. And of course, now some of you are also concerned with the question, what happens if the UK leaves without a deal? Whether this will make any difference, and the short answer, as I already said in my introduction. So, if there is a no-deal exit, the Swiss-UK agreement will apply from the date the UK ceases to be a EU member state. So no difference in substance between deal and no-deal situation. So that's probably enough in terms of background, and now I would like to move over to answering your questions, starting with the ones that you have been sending in, and then we will also later on be able to answer some of your questions you are sending in right now. Of course, from the short summaries you sent in, we are not able to give binding answer. We can give general guidelines, but not a binding answer in every concrete case. But I think we will be able to give you a good steer, I think, I hope. Now, so much for the background. Now, Joe, have I forgotten something?
No, you were very complete.
Good. So let's go then to the questions you already sent in. Question 1 is from Iris. And she says, I am married to a Brit and have been in the UK over 4 years. The question is, what do I have to do? And what is your recommendation of what I should do? So the answer is, any EU, EEA, that's the European Economic Area, or Swiss national married to a British person will need to apply for settled status or pre-settled That's always the same. I only say settled status. If they have not previously taken British citizenship. So even if you are married to a British citizen, you will indeed need to apply for settled status. And we have had similar questions from Denise, Maria and Karin. And so that is what we would like to stress. You do have to apply for settled status irrespective, regardless whether or not you are married to a British citizen. Our second question is from Anne-Marie. She says, I am a Swiss national living in the UK since 2006. I obtained my permanent residency card last year, which confirms the date. Am I correct in believing that I would now only need to register for free? Also, Anne-Marie says, I travel a few times a year to Switzerland with my British husband. Will he need to obtain some sort of visa to travel to Switzerland or to ensure his passport is valid for more than 6 months? Now, the answer to your first question, yes, this is correct. You do not need to pay to convert your permanent residency into a settled status. No one needs to pay for settled status at all now, as we have just seen beforehand. If you have a document certifying permanent residence, as it is called, you do indeed need to convert this into settled status in the same way as those who do not have this document certifying permanent residence. For those of you with a indefinite leave of remain, that's something else, that's different status. You have no obligation to convert this to settled status, and you could indeed continue to live in the United Kingdom indefinitely without it. But it is worth thinking about doing so, as there are some extra privileges that come with the settled status. For example, the rights will not lapse unless the holder has been absent from the UK for more than 4 consecutive years. Whereas with the indefinite leave to remain, that elapses after 2 years. So the settled status is in a way better than the indefinite leave to remain, and so you will want to think it through whether you apply for the settled status. You also raised the question of a British partner travelling to Switzerland. In the event of a deal, there will be no changes, and in the event of a no deal, your British partner will still need no visa, needed, but passport validity rules will change with a no-deal Brexit. Passport validity rules will change with a no-deal Brexit, and I suggest that you have a quick look at the Home Office website. My team will post a link under this video to their Check a Passport services. Essentially, UK passport holders will need a minimum of 6 months left on their travel documents to enter the Schengen area, of which Switzerland is part, if the UK leaves the EU without a deal. On a similar note, next question, Elke writes in German, so I translate what she wrote in, and Elke asked, what will change for British citizens if they A, visit Switzerland, or B, want to settle in Switzerland? So here again, we need to differentiate between a deal scenario and no deal scenario. In case of a deal scenario, in an orderly exit based on the UK-EU withdrawal agreement, the UK's departure will be followed by a status quo transition period that lasts until the end of 2020. So in case of a deal, nothing actually changes until the end of 2020. And during that period, freedom of movement will go on, And British nationals will continue to be able to travel to Europe and indeed to Switzerland and to settle there just as they do now. That's the deal scenario with the transitional period where nothing changes. In the case of a no-deal Brexit, to visit Switzerland, as I mentioned before, no visas will be needed, but you will be aware of the validity rules for the passport. In terms of settling, and again, this applies only for the no-deal scenario. Deal scenario, no problem for settling. In the no-deal scenario, a British national moving to Switzerland after the 29th of March 2019 will in principle be treated as a third country national and as such would like to fulfill additional criteria to be able to settle in Switzerland. For instance, quill requirements or quota. And this would obviously be different again if the Brit is married to a Swiss. So if you would like to us to look into that more specifically, the concrete situation you're faced with, please tell us and we will try to help you. Also, there are ongoing discussions between the Swiss and the British authorities on the topic of the future entries. So all of this will also be subject to discussions regarding our future bilateral relationship. Question 4. Patricia asks us, I have been here since 2007. Can I apply for settled status, and is the embassy able to certify in writing that I have been living in the UK from this date? Yes, is the answer. If you have been here for more than 5 years, then you should apply for settled status. And in terms of the evidence accepted by the Home Office, there is a section on their website dedicated to it. And again, there is a link in this video which leads you to that page of the Home Office. So, what are those evidence you can submit? National insurance number is probably the easiest form of evidence. You simply type the number in and the computer does the rest. If you don't have a national insurance number, there are a range of other documents that are accepted, such as bank statements, mortgage statements, rental agreements, council tax bills, university letters, letters confirming employer pension contributions, P45s, P60s, and these do not need to cover the entire period you have been here. They need just to cover 5 years. So any 5 years in your stay here, which has not been invalidated by you then living the country for longer than 4 years. So any 5-year period. The embassy is able to produce something that proves you're registered here. If indeed you have registered with the embassy, as is indeed your obligation. But it is unlikely that an embassy confirmation, an embassy letter, would account for any longer than just the month of your registration. Because what we are able to produce is a confirmation that you have been registered with us since a given date. But this registration is done on your self-declaration, and we do not then check where you are and whether you stay here. So probably this confirmation would not be helping you much compared to the sort of documents the Home Office has presented as what they will accept as evidence. And plus, I must say, if you ask for such a confirmation letter, we will have to ask you for a small fee for that privilege. The 5th question is from Anna Maria, who would like to know what the impact will be on transferring UK pension funds contributions back to Switzerland if she decides to move back there. I'll take this with another question on the same note Sandra asks, she says, my question is around the state pension. Will AHV entitlement, AHV years, accumulated in Switzerland still be counted towards the UK state pensions if retiring here? So the aim of the Swiss-UK Citizens Agreement in the field of social security is to avoid, as far as possible, changes to all the Swiss living in the UK and the British living in Switzerland, of course, and to protect their acquired rights. This will ensure that citizens who have moved between the UK and Switzerland before Brexit are not disadvantaged in their access to pension, benefits and other forms of social security, including healthcare cover. So in response to Anna Maria's question, contributions made under the UK system remain in the UK system and will give entitlement to a UK pension. Its amount will be based on the UK periods of contribution. And this pension is payable to a person who moved to Switzerland before or after Brexit. So you do not lose those entitlements. And the same applies to Sandra's case. Contributions made under the Swiss system, which will be taken into account. As now, the amount of Swiss pension to which you will be entitled as a result of these contributions will be determined according to Switzerland's social security legislation. So basically, it remains as it is now. We have another pensions question that has been sent in by Ruth on behalf of a Swiss friend who has lived and worked in the UK for 10 years. He is a university lecturer, but he has now moved on to work at a university in an EU country. And the question then is, what would a no deal mean for my UK pension with me no longer living in the UK? So our agreement secures the right to a future UK pension for Swiss citizens, even in case of a no-deal scenario. Swiss citizens can claim their UK pension from abroad, and if they meet the qualifying criteria, receive the pension while they live abroad. So also in this case, UK pension entitlements would be protected. Next up is a question from Michael. He writes to us. He is UK based, but working across Europe and on a cruise ship from February to September this year. So Michael, you have been here for 6 years already. You can apply, therefore, for settled status, not just for pre-settled status. You mentioned in your full message to us that during those 6 years, your employment and tax situation has varied. So it could be that the national insurance number alone doesn't pull up enough evidence to show your residence. But regardless of tax, you've lived here continuously. So it shouldn't be a problem for you to show through things like rental agreements, bank statements, that you have spent 5 continuous years here. It's just slightly more laborious, less automated route to proving it, but it should be okay. You were concerned about a no-deal scenario because you will be out of the country at the date in March. This shouldn't make any difference in your case, as you've already hit the 5-year threshold. For others who are working abroad, like Michael, this might be useful additional information. Whilst you have to be in the UK for 6 months in every 12 months period, there are exceptions made if you leave to undertake military service, study, a posting overseas, pregnancy, childbirth, or illness. The continuous residence rules means that it is any absence exceeding 6 months in any given 12-month period that breaks the continuity and resets the clock on accruing years of residence. So, for example, and so any 12 months, so that's not restricted to a calendar year. It's any 12 months, 6 months of any 12 months, sliding on the calendar year's scale, if you will. So, for example, if an applicant is in the UK for 11 months and then absent for 7 months, they break the continuity and have to accrue residency anew for the years. Additionally, if you are overseas but still being paid and paying taxes in the UK, it is not likely it will be picked up that you were absent when you input your national insurance number as part of the settled status process. And finally, by the time the scheme opens fully at the end of March, you will be able to apply from overseas. You will not have to be physically present in the UK to go through the settlement status application form. On to our 8th question, which we received from Catherine. My mother is a Swiss citizen and emigrated to the UK in the early 60s. She still has a Swiss passport, but has no documentation relating to her status in Britain, and as far as we know, has never applied for British citizenship. What should she do? Your mother will need to apply for settled status. She will not need to go back to provide documentation over her whole life here. She will just need to produce evidence from a continuous 5-year period. If she has a national insurance number, then that, plus her Swiss passport or Swiss ID card, should be all that she needs to upload. If she doesn't have a national insurance number, or she perhaps hasn't worked nor claimed benefits, and therefore the national insurance check doesn't evidence her residence, there are lots of alternative documents, as I mentioned in a previous question. Anita, that's the next question, checks with us. I have dual nationality, so do I need to apply for settled status? We had a similar question from Rachel too, and the answer is no. You do not need to apply for settled status, and in saying no, of course, I assume that you mean Swiss-British dual nationality, of course. Other combinations would have a different answer. If you are a double national Swiss and another EU nationality, you will have to choose which nationality through which nationality you want to apply for settled status, because there are some differences between applying for settled status as a Swiss national and applying for settled status for as a EU national. But here it becomes a tiny little bit complicated, so I turn over to my expert, my resident expert, Joe.
Right. So there are some subtle differences between the UK-Swiss Citizens' Rights Deal and the UK-EU Withdrawal Agreement. So depending on your personal situation, you can choose whether you'd want to apply with your Swiss passport or whether you would want to apply with your EU passport if you have one. So most importantly, and the Ambassador has mentioned that the Swiss agreement applies also in the case of a no-deal situation. Now, the UK government is committed to implementing the settlement scheme for EU citizens in the event of a no deal anyway. So in practical terms, this might be a bit of a minor difference. But if you're looking for additional legal reassurance, then in the Swiss case, this commitment by the UK government is underpinned by an international treaty that is also binding on the UK as such. Then another area in which the Swiss deal is slightly more generous than the UK-EU deal is in the area of family reunification rights. So I think you briefly touched on this as well. Future spouses of eligible Swiss citizens will also be able to join the Swiss citizen in the UK within a period of 5 years following the entry into force of our UK-Swiss citizens' rights deal. And this is not the case for EU citizens. For them, family members will be able to join them in the UK at any point in the future, but only if this relationship already existed before the end of the transitional period, which is the end of December 2020, and if that relationship still exists at the time this family member wants to join the EU citizen in the UK. Then another point that might be a bit less relevant for most Swiss citizens here in the UK, but it is very important in the wider context of our bilateral relations. That's the Swiss-UK deal also covers the continuation of services provision. So this means that contracts that have been concluded prior to Brexit Day or prior to the end of the transition period, they can be implemented for a period of up to 5 years after that specified day. This in turn is a rolling over of provisions we have under the existing free movement of persons agreement that is in place, and the EU-UK withdrawal agreement does not cover this specific topic. Then finally, on the other hand, there is in one point the EU version is slightly more generous than the Swiss deal. So that's in terms of the permitted period of absence from the UK territory without losing settled status. So in the EU version, you'll be able to spend up to 5 years in a row outside of the UK without losing this status, whereas under the terms of the Swiss-UK deal, you can only spend up to 4 years outside or overseas without losing the status. And this is basically, it's down to a national law in Switzerland that would not allow us to go beyond that period of time. So those are the main differences between our deal, the Swiss deal, and the UK-EU withdrawal agreement in terms of citizens' rights.
So that should help you to decide, Rachel, whether you want to apply as or those that we don't know whether Rachel is double national. Swiss-British, then the problem is not there. But for any double national Swiss-EU, you can then base your decision based on what Joe just said. Next question. Ursula asks us whether it will be at all possible to apply from overseas. She lived in the UK from 2010 to 2016, accrued the necessary 5 years of continuous residence and can evidence this. And now she lives in Switzerland, but would like to move back to the UK in future to apply for settled status and now she would like to apply for a settled status from overseas. So as I mentioned earlier, from March onwards, when the settled status application process fully opens for the Swiss, you will not need to be physically present in the UK to apply. You will be able to apply from overseas. And Ursula, as you only left the UK in 2016, your accrued years still count. You can apply as long as you have left the UK within the past 4 years. Any longer than that, and you would have to build up qualifying years again. Next question is from Franz. He asks, from the pilot applications, we already learned that there can be problems. One person was given pre-settled status instead of settled status. How can incorrect decisions by the Home Office be appealed and reflected? We should remember that this is still a pilot phase where this evidence stems from. At the moment, we can be optimistic and we hope that by the time the scheme is fully opened in March and the Swiss citizens are able to apply, that some of the teething problems should have been ironed out. In terms of the appeal process, yes, there are a few stages to this if you are not happy with the decision you're given. applicants that will have multiple opportunities during the application process to provide further evidence to support a claim for settled status rather than pre-settled status, and the application will then tell them exactly which periods of residence they need to provide additional evidence. If your application was refused on eligibility grounds, or if you were granted a pre-settled status but you think you qualify for a settled status, you can apply for an administrative review. The Home Office has given us links to more information on appealing, and I think it might be helpful if we also posted these links to the administrative review and appealing processes beneath our reviews, our video. So go to that links. Next, Ruth has another question. She writes, I read yesterday that those who have an iPhone or another device or aren't online can get help from one of 13 centres around the UK. The only one in Scotland is in Edinburgh, while anyone in Cornwall will need to make a trip to Bath. So yes, I have read that article myself over the weekend. 13 is the number of identity document scanner locations, as they are called, which were open for a previous test last year, which had just 30,000 applicants. This is not an indicator of how many there will be when the scheme fully opens in March. More locations are being rolled out at the moment, and there will be full national coverage, according to the Home Office, by the time the scheme opens fully at the end of March. And with regard to not having an Android phone, if you don't know anyone who has an Android phone and which you could borrow, then there are two other ways to verify your identity, either by post or at a centre. You can drop in with your passport and confirm your ID there and then. I understand that the Home Office is working with Apple at the moment to try to get the process working on iPhones as well. And finally, for this round of questions, Monica asks about pet passports. So this is an area that potentially gets trickier, I'm afraid, in the event of no deal. In the event of no deal, UK-issued pet passports would no longer be recognised in the EU and thus in Switzerland. And so the UK would return to the status of a non-listed third country, to which the strictest restrictions apply. If there is a deal, the current rules would continue, no problem at all. If there is no deal, I'm afraid it will be tricky. So, these are the questions we wanted to dwell on, the questions you sent in beforehand. But as we spoke, you have been firing in other questions. And Joachim, what are there? Can we group or cluster that kind of questions? And how many questions are we able to answer? What's our time budget?
We have about 15 minutes left, so we will have up to 5 questions probably,
right,
which we'll have time for. Shall I start with the first one, maybe?
Yes, please.
So Tanya is asking, you used the word partner for visa-free travel to Switzerland. Is that husbands only? And the answer to this is no, this is about all British citizens regarding visa-free travel to Switzerland. It's not dependent on any relationship you may or may not have with a Swiss citizen. That concerns short-stay visits in Switzerland, and that will... British citizens will be exempt from the visa obligation to travel to Switzerland in future. That applies both in a deal and a no-deal scenario. And actually, the UK government only just yesterday did they confirm their no-deal planning for future visits, and they confirmed that EU citizens and EEA and Swiss citizens will also be exempt from the visa obligation when traveling to the UK for short stay visits. So that's this one. Asia is asking, our son has Swiss and German citizenship. He was born in Scotland in 1995. He's now thinking about going for a year to Switzerland to do his PhD. Can he come back for good after that period of studies in Switzerland? So what I would answer is, if your son applies for settled status, which he will be entitled to, and once he has settled status, he will be able to be overseas or absent from the UK territory for up to 4 years without losing this status. So he can go to Switzerland, do his studies there. If it's not more or a longer period than 4 years, he can after that return to the UK and settle again in the UK on the terms of the settlement scheme. Then a follow-up question on this is, he is wondering about whether he might be able to get British citizenship without losing his Swiss and, I guess, German citizenships. So I can just only answer for the Swiss part of this question, which is yes, both Switzerland and the UK allow for dual nationality. So even if your son was to go on and apply for British citizenship, he would not lose his Swiss citizenship in parallel. Then, next one. Caroline is asking, my children have grown up here and work here in the UK. They only have a Swiss passport. If they go back to live and work in Switzerland for a year, can they come back to the UK and work here again? So this is more or less the same question as the one we addressed just previously. It's the exact same situation. Your children can apply for settled status, get that settled status, and will then be allowed to be absent from the UK for a period of up to 4 years, and after that return to the UK to settle here back again.
And if they stay away for longer than 4 years, then it wouldn't make a difference that they have actually grown up here. They would start all over again with collecting the 5 years.
No, they would lose. I mean, it then depends on the timing, but they would lose their settled status and would then have to apply for UK residency under the future UK immigration law, which is not known yet, but in all likelihood is going to be more restrictive than the current scheme. Then Nicole is asking, she wrote this one in German, I will try to translate this in English as we go on. So she would like to know if there are any criteria that would influence her getting pre-settled status. She says some have claimed that everyone receives the status who has a Swiss passport and a UK address. Is this really the case, or are factors such as the job situation, unemployment, affecting this decision? I would just refer to what the ambassador said during his talk. In principle, in order to get settled status, you have to go through 3 key steps in the application procedure. The first one being proof of identity, so you'll have to evidence that you're actually a Swiss citizen. The second one being evidence of your residence in the UK, that's the 5 years of continuous residence in the UK, and the third one being the criminality check, so you must not, be a serious or have committed serious crimes in the past. Having said this, the employment situation of the applicant will not be taken into account, so it's really just merely those 3 steps we outlined previously. Deborah is asking, can you comment on any changes for British citizens in Switzerland? I'm worried that when I decide to go home with my British husband, he may have issues. I can say at the outset, so if the British citizen in question is married to a Swiss citizen, he will be able in future to accompany his Swiss spouse, return to Switzerland, settle there, take residence there. That will not be a problem under the terms of the Swiss national legislation in question. If there is no relationship, a British citizen just wanting to settle in Switzerland in the future, that then again depends on whether we're in a deal or a no-deal scenario. In a deal scenario, there will be the transition period that will preserve the status quo, freedom of movement, he or she will be able to go to Switzerland without issues. In a no-deal scenario, it could be that the British citizen in future will have to comply with the more restrictive terms of the Swiss national legislation in question in order to settle there. But for travelling, as outlined previously, that will be visa-free, no problem with that.
You say there may be stricter rules, but he is married to the Swiss citizen. Does that mitigate?
Yeah, as I said in this question, so Deborah asked, she is married to a British husband. There is no question. There is no issue in that context. If you're a spouse of a Swiss citizen, then you can go on and settle in Switzerland also in future, regardless of the scenario. Mm-hmm. And then those are rather straightforward. The last couple of questions. I have a permanent right to remain already in the UK. Do I have to do anything? Do you want to go on and answer this one? Or?
No, go on.
Right.
We did.
You addressed
touch
this
upon
question.
it, yes.
Exactly.
But
you addressed
if you
this
can
question
repeat,
in your talk. So this depends whether you have a document certifying permanent residence in the UK or whether you have indefinite leave to remain. So in case of the former, you have to apply. It will be rather straightforward. You will get your settled status. But if you have indefinite leave to remain, you do not in principle have to apply for settled status. But it may be beneficial for you in various respects, which we outlined as well.
Notably, how long you can then leave.
Exactly.
Without losing it.
Yes. So the period of absence. If you have indefinite leave to remain, you can only be absent for up to 2 years before losing this status. If you go on and apply for settled status, you will be able to be absent for 4 years in total. Yeah, I think that's...
No, we have done... What does Catherine now say? I moved...
I'm not sure whether that's the same, Catherine.
Yeah.
So Catherine says, I moved to the UK in 1991. In June 2016, I went back to Switzerland for 2 years and 1 month. So when she came back to Switzerland, I reapplied for permanent residency. So since July, I've been back in the UK with my permanent right to remain. Do I have to apply for the new documents or for the new settled status? Exactly the same answer as we gave previously. If you have indefinite leave to remain, you do not need to, but you can, and it may be advantageous. If you have the document certifying permanent residence, then you will have to apply for settled status in order to be able to remain in the UK.
Thank you very much, Joe. I'm looking over to Rose, who collects the questions as they are coming in. Are there questions that touch aspects we have not dealt with at all in the initial presentation or in the questions? No. Okay. So I think that concludes this question and answer session for today. I would like to thank you for joining us in this exchange, and I would also like to thank you for the patience you had during that process. I know that some of you felt it was a bit frustrating to go onto the frequent asked questions on the website where we were constantly referring you to see that nothing much was evolving there in the frequent asked questions. But that was because we were in conversations with the British authorities, and we had to go, the extra mile to make sure that everything was safe and solid. And that's what we have now done. If you didn't get if we didn't get to your question, or you have another question you would like us to assist, so then please send us your question and we will reply directly to you. This video will be pinned on our website. We will also share it on a YouTube channel, which the link you will see here as well. So please share that with your friends and family who are not on Facebook and who may find the information useful. And we are hoping through that tool to reach a maximum number of compatriots across the British Isles. Now, we are aware that not everybody is online, and so we are more than happy to travel to information events, to answer questions in person. If anyone out there would like, as a member of a Swiss club, organize an event, so please get in touch with us and we will be happy to come and meet with you and discuss the matter further. And if you found our discussion now useful, and if there is a demand, then certainly we can consider repeating that and do another such Facebook Live. And so we will possibly even be doing one after the process has opened. The settlement application process has opened, and we have first feedbacks from you, and we will then be able to exchange. So, you know where we are there for you. Please get in touch if you have a problem, and thank you very much for your interest. Joe, Rose, merci beaucoup. À bientôt.